Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Adam Garnet Jones, a writer and filmmaker whose debut feature, Fire Song, won the Audience Choice Award at the Imaginative Film Festival in 2015. His follow-up, Great, 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 which he co-wrote and co-produced with star Sarah Kolaski, was named Best Feature at last year's Canadian Film Festival with special jury awards for its screenplay and Sarah's performance. It's just arrived on iTunes, and you should definitely check it out. Adam picked The Piano, Jane Campion's eerie, evocative 1993 drama starring Holly Hunter as a mute woman who brings her young daughter to New Zealand, where they'll live with a well-to-do farmer, and almost immediately finds herself at odds with everyone and everything around her and drawn to a handsome outsider. A smash at Cannes, where Hunter was named Best Actress, and the film shared the Palme d'Or with Chen Kai-gei's Farewell, My Concubine, The Piano became an art house breakout thanks to Miramax's evocative marketing campaign, which led to Oscars for Campion, Hunter, and Anna Paquin for Best Screenplay, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actress, respectively. It's receded a little over the last few years, even as Campion's own star has risen again with Top of the Lake, so it was great to have a chance to dive back into its murky depths. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It's probably better to talk about a film that had a really deep personal impact on me as a piece of artwork, just because it leaves more room to talk about a film and why it is that we love movies. So that and The Piano is definitely that film for me. I saw it when I was 11, I think, and it was the first film that I saw where I felt like, oh, this is art. This is something totally different, because my dad was a huge fan of like the 90s sex thriller genre, and like any kind of thriller, but particularly the 90s sex thriller he really got into, and we watched everything with him. Like classification did not matter. I think my 10th birthday party, we watched Boys in the Hood. And with me and all my friends, and I'm sure that the other parents had no idea what we were watching.
I mean, a film that could arguably be improved with the addition of an erotic thriller aspect. But I thought you were going to say Basic Instinct or something.
No.
Yeah.
Just
like in general, permissiveness.
In general, yeah. My dad was just kind of like, the floodgates are open, and as a result, like, we actually never had a proper sex talk, because I learned it all from movies, right? Well, so if you're watching enough 90s sex thrillers, you don't actually need to talk about it, because it all becomes very clear.
Oh wow, to have, like, that's almost a sitcom premise now, to have somebody's image of have your conception of sexuality and self be shaped by the glossiest, kind of cheesiest genre there is.
Oh yeah.
I mean, did you watch horror movies too? Did you get that weird connection between sex and death?
No, my dad was not into horror movies, and so we didn't really rent those. And my little later on, my stepmom was really into like comedies, and also like sort of sweeping, Oscar bait dramas. And
prestige
so I saw a lot of those kinds of movies as well.
So The Piano fit in how? You just happened to be watching it?
It's something that, I have no idea why it was that that my family would have rented it, except it was a huge movie at the time.
Yeah, won a couple of Oscars, right? Big deal.
But I remember I saw it before it won an Academy Award, and during the Academy Awards race, I was so strongly rooting for that movie. And I remember my sister saw it in the theater, I think she saw it in the theater when it first came out, and I asked her about it, and she said, no, I don't think it's something that you would like. And I felt so betrayed by her later on when I eventually saw the film, because I just felt like it spoke to something very primal in me, obviously, as like, an 11-year-old Canadian, this movie about this, mute woman in New Zealand.
Yes. Turn of the century, brutality, and okay, wow, all right, that's really fascinating. Like, what a great way to see something like that. To be blindsided by something so idiosyncratic. I mean, say what you will about the movie, there's nothing else like it. Even Campion's other films don't really feel like this one, I think.
No,
there's a continuity.
It's interesting something about like this specificity and also the universality of stories. Jane Campion was not making that movie for me. I mean, there's a lot of focus when you're pitching films and talking about, who your audience is going to be and who's going to respond to the film and, who are the people who are going to really love this movie. There's no way, she was sitting at a boardroom table saying, you know what, I think that, 11-year-old boys are going to really be into this movie.
In Canada.
In Canada.
Yeah.
And of course they weren't, but I was, and it made a very strong impression on me.
I love these stories. So many people have brought movies onto the podcast that are just, it was this rogue element in their lives and it changed them. Mm-hmm. Kelly McCormick had that experience with Phantom of the Paradise. Rick Roberts was talking about Eraserhead that way. Just, they're great, and I didn't have that experience, and I miss it. I was just such a voracious consumer of cinema as a kid that I ate everything without thinking about how it was going to affect me, and so it never happened in the moment. Like, I never had this thing happen where you're a different person when you walk out.
Yeah.
But that's so cool. So
I mean, I definitely did, and I told lots of people about it. I remember making family members sit down and watch it.
Okay.
Like, going to the video store and renting it with them, being like, "This is a real movie. You're gonna love this one," and then kind of forcing them to watch it and having them shake their heads and just be a bit confused about. I don't know if it was because they didn't love the film or if they were very confused by me being such a champion of that story. But eventually my dad was away fairly often, and I was at home alone a lot, and so I would go to and we had an account at the video store because we rented so many movies, and so I would go to the video store and I used to rent it over and over again all the time when everyone was away, so I would watch it by myself.
And this is back in the days when VHS tapes, people don't believe me when I tell them this. It used to be that if you wanted a movie, you bought it for $150 or you just rented it a lot, and that made more sense. Like, renting something repeatedly was a thing we did.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, and as a kid, I had no money of my own, but we had this account at the video store. I remember we were part of the Century Club, so we could get 100 movies for $100 at this video store.
That's very reasonable.
So my dad was just kind of like, well, yeah, rent as many movies as you want to. It costs basically nothing. So, that was a lot of rentals at the piano.
Ballpark, how many times? I mean, dozens?
Oh, God. Yeah, dozens for sure.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what was your first experience of it? I mean, how did it feel to you? How did it play to you? What did you take away from it?
I felt the way that lots of people do when they have really personal experiences of art. I really felt like that she was speaking to me. I so strongly identified with the character of Ada, and she was like a hero to me, because I was, a really quiet and shy kid, and I'd been like abused and neglected earlier in my childhood, and so when that film came along, it was really interesting to see this woman who was so powerless and so powerful, because it was very much the way that I felt. And then she also had this secret artistry, this secret way of expressing herself, which is, I'm sure, the way almost every young person or any young teenager feels about themselves. They have they're quiet and they're withdrawn and they're wounded, but they have this secret, special, beautiful gift to offer the world, and that was her music. And so, I'm sure it was like the very broad romance of that that appealed to me. And but it's such a strange story because she never, I think it's billed as a romance, but
that's definitely how it was sold, like an exotic love story from the people who brought you The English Patient, I think is how Miramax positioned it at the time. It's like, well, I guess those words are true in that order.
Interesting, because for her, there's these men who are kind of obsessed with her, but they don't actually really know anything about her, and so they're in love with their own constructions of her and their own ideas of her. And I remember watching the film and being, and maybe that's part of the reason why I watched it again and again, is I felt so confused about what it was that drew Ada to Baines, because I understood why he would be attracted to her. She's miraculous. She's so wonderful and so compelling. But he is, he's kind of sullen at first, and he is really rough with her. She never really communicates a strong interest in him, except toward the end, and it's not really clear about whether or not that interest in him is more in opposition to her husband than anything. So it never really feels like a genuine discovery of love that she's having. It's almost like a kind of a desire for escape and a discovery of sex and all of that. And so when they kind of they take off together, and of course she spoiler alert, she throws the piano off the side, and then she goes down and to the bottom of the ocean and tries to kill herself, and then ultimately saves herself. I remember watching that and loving it, and just wishing so desperately the movie ended with her dead at the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, because it's an appropriate romantic ending, like the classical concept of romanticism, not swoony romantic ending.
Probably, and it felt truer to me, and that strange turn where you see her later learning to speak and kind of setting up house with this guy. I just felt like, why would she do that? And trying, maybe part of it was that I was watching the film over and over to unpack what it was that she saw in him, or why she would do that. I mean, everything feels like it leads to that impulsive moment where she throws herself over into the water and decides to end her life at the piano.
I wonder if that isn't... I mean, there's the impulse to read it as a death fantasy. This is just the alternative she fashions for herself as she's going down. But I don't think so. I think... I mean, just given the way that Campion works as a storyteller and the other things she's done, I feel like it's almost her attempt to give the audience a kind of a condescending ending, and a way to say that, oh, look, they lived happily ever after. That we would know isn't real, that we would somehow feel like it's not right, and that in our hearts we know that she shouldn't have done that, even if because survival is compromise. It leads to compromising herself and being someone else, or changing herself in a way that nothing. Yeah, you're right. Nothing in the film has prepared us for. But it doesn't sit. It's just itchy. Yeah.
At the end, I don't know, which is interesting for such a successful romantic film that had this huge stamp of approval from Hollywood. Usually those films feel much more resolved.
And I'm wondering too if maybe that isn't one of the earliest signs of Harvey Weinstein's infamous meddling in Miramax productions, where he tried to engineer a happy ending and she gave him one that, I mean, it's not satisfying. It's narratively satisfying because you get a happy ending and a domestic future, and she finally has a place and people who accept her. But you're right. It's emotionally untenable. It just doesn't sit.
But in a way, I think that is better than if it were to end with her, with her dress all ballooned around her at the bottom of the ocean. I don't think people would have liked it as much. And although there's something about that would be very, I don't know, there would be a symmetry to that would be really satisfying. Something about that itchy, uncomfortable piece that's tacked on at the end seems to beg the question, but what do we want? What do we want for her? I mean, why do we want her to die? Why do we want to leave her at the bottom of the ocean? Why would that be? Why does that feel like it would be more satisfying, or more real? I think it sort of spirals your brain off into different questions about women's lives and the kinds of stories that we tell about women, and we've seen this character and she's punished so much throughout the story, And it's interesting that she's offered this little glimmer of something at the end, and it kind of feels like, it's just not real.
Yeah, it's not what she deserves. But does she deserve to die? Yeah, and maybe that's the Gothic aspect of it, where, a woman is brought to a strange place, and generally when those stories play, they meet their doom. Mm-hmm. So we just assume it's written into the nature of the story, but of course it doesn't have to be. And maybe too, Campion's other films at that point had been Sweetie and the miniseries of An Angel at My Table, which are both very downbeat tales of female suffering. Like, the women in those movies aren't happy, and they don't get to be.
Yeah.
Janet Frame finds peace, but it's not the same thing. And with this, you've got someone who goes through hell, comes out the other side, and that ought to be enough. Mm-hmm. But I guess also all those pieces that come together at the end are in some ways compromises too. Her daughter has betrayed her, and they're back together, and that's okay. But yeah, not really. That's something the kid has to live with, even if her mother isn't fully cognizant of what happened.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions, which is part of maybe what's good about that ending is it cracks those questions back open again, because if she dies, then it's like, well, whatever questions you have about those relationships don't really matter, because those relationships are over. Mm-hmm. That question of like what happens, how do people go on living after something like that is, I mean, it's a whole other movie.
Yes, yeah, it is, isn't it? It's another story entirely, and a different dynamic and a different environment. Everything about it is different. So, the only sure thing you would take away from the piano, had it ended with her death, is that Sam Neill is not a good person in this movie, but he's such a nice guy. I love watching him play villains, because he's one of the sweetest people I've ever met, and it's just fascinating to watch him do that. He fully commits. I mean, he's giving everything you need from a proper Gothic romance villain in this. But he kind of has his reasons. I mean, he's a monster, but he's acting from a position that he believes is appropriate, which just makes the character more complex and harder to disconnect from completely. Like, you can't fully abandon him because he's acting according to his idea of decency and patriarchy and masculinity. He just literally doesn't know any better. Mm-hmm. And because they're in a new world, a place that they've carved out for themselves, he's making his own rules. They're just terrible. He's a dictator. He just thinks he's a nobleman.
Yeah, and she's a piece of his property, and he feels that he has these rights to her and to her body. And, I mean, she refuses to allow him that. But he doesn't know what else to do, and so he just pursues that gross logic of ownership.
Yeah, I'm not trying to argue that he has some valid points. I suddenly realized that also sounded like a really weird Gamergate kind of defense of dudes doing what dudes need to do. But then you immediately have the alternative presented in the way Keitel gets into his character, which is he's inarticulate and he's crude and he's exotic in a different way, with tattoos and everything, and you immediately write him off until you realize that he's so much more than his exterior. And casting Keitel is also kind of ingenious, because he wasn't doing a lot of sweet guys at that time. Like, this is a year after Bad Lieutenant, he's done Reservoir Dogs, he's just totally changed up everything to make this little movie in New Zealand. Yeah. And he's ideal. Like, I was trying to figure out if anybody else could have played it. It's one of those roles where it just shapes itself around him. It's true, yeah. And it's hard because I don't know who the Maori actors were that were around at the time. I mean, there's definitely, has been talk about how it should have been a Maori actor playing that character. And, I feel like without question, were that movie made now? Absolutely. But... or some kind of Pacific Islander. Yeah, Tamara Morrison had made... I think they'd shot Once Were Warriors around that time, but it hadn't been released yet, maybe, right around that window. Oh, yeah. But I want to say that came out a year later in 94. There were Maori actors available, yeah. But, God, because... what's his name who's in Once Were Warriors is so good.
Cliff Curtis, yeah. He's in Once Were Warriors, right?
I think you're right. I think he plays the younger son.
Cliff Curtis would have been amazing. I actually think Cliff Curtis is a better actor than Harvey Keitel. And I think that some people are distracted by that, and I think I just love the movie a lot and haven't allowed myself to be distracted by that casting. I mean, I think that that's part of why the film also has worked its way so deeply into my psyche. I mean, it also has elements of, depression, suicide, which I have, struggled with for my whole life as a person, but also, worked with in the films that I've made and the writing that I've done, and also the whole Indigenous aspect of the story of the piano felt really important to me when I was watching it as a kid, because it, in some ways, that whole Indigenous community is kind of background to the story. The story is really Ada's story, but it's handled in such a good way. Like the Maori characters that are in the film feel fully fleshed out. I know that people have been critical of their depictions a little bit, from kind of like an Indigenous arts perspective.
Right.
But to the extent that they're on screen, without writing more for their characters to do, I always felt like those characters have a really solid relationship to one another. There's a kind of a looseness and a real love for each other, and a strength in that community. As it's portrayed in the film, it's really weird because they're pretty goofy in a way, but they're also very strong.
Yeah.
Which feels real. It feels real as far as my experience, and it's something that a lot of movies don't get right. Thinking of a lot of Hollywood westerns where you have, it's basically a story about a couple of white characters, and then there's these native people in the background.
Yeah, this exoticized other backdrop to the story.
And often they're there and they're on horseback and they're stoic, or they're selectively used as victims, or it's very easy to understand who they are and how they fit. But in the piano, the scenes that you have with those characters are really interesting, because there's the one with the kids, and the kids are all playing that game where they're humping the trees.
Yes.
And you get to see these two totally different attitudes toward sexuality. And then again in the scene with the shadow play. Do you remember that?
That's right, yeah.
And they're doing, what is it, the Bluebeard?
A variation on something
Bluebeard.
a story we sort of know, but it's been
and so he's comes in and he's got all these women's heads, the heads of his wives that he's decapitated and hung on the wall, and all of the British people are there and they're delighted by it because it's very campy and it's a very silly take on that story. But the Maori people, for whom that's not part of their canon or traditional storytelling, see him as this terrible villain about to do this horrible thing to this woman, and they take it very seriously. And so then there's a conflict, and there's some kind of silliness around that, but
and of course it subtextually underlines Sam Neill's relationship to Hunter as well. I mean, I think those characters would see it more clearly than even the audience does, than we in the audience do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get to see these different cultural points of view in ways that are not part of the main thrust of the story, but they're all part of the context of the film that becomes so important, and everything beautifully dovetails into that story. But you have a really rich Indigenous contribution that feels beautiful and strong and lived in, and really unusual. Yeah,
and respected in a way that I think Campion. It almost feels as though every now and then there's another movie that just sort of wanders into this main story. It's not A story, B story, but the Maori narrative yeah, as you say, it's happening independently of them. They're watching them. They're watching these white people as much as we're watching them, and it's not condescending to them. The film gives them their space, like, literally, to do whatever it is that they're going to do,
and suggests more story. You know, there's the way that, you know, toward the end of the film, when the piano is put on the ship, and there's the Ada and Baines and the Maori sailors are paddling the huge canoe off, and there's the older Maori woman who's left on shore, and she's watching them go, and she's singing like a traveling song, and the camera lingers on her for a while, and she's very prominent in frame, and there's, you know, a whole suggestion of this other world and this other story, and the camera could have just as easily followed her and continued to tell that story. And I think that that's what those kinds of whole diverse representations on screen look like. If you can, when you feel like the camera can just move and follow anyone, that's when you have a real character, you have a real person on screen. And I think, yeah, that was something that was definitely exciting to me as a kid.
I keep thinking about whether or not, and this is going to sound potentially culturally insensitive, but whether or not Campion's choice of having a white actor play the Keitel role, to play Baines, is a comment on his own, like, it's a better way to suggest an outsider, because he's gone, you know, to steal the old, well, not to steal, he's gone native, which is an awful term, but in the period, it was simply how people dismissed anyone who would choose to embrace another culture. But he can't fully be Maori. He can't be one of them, no matter how hard he tries. He'll always stand out and be distinct, and he'll know himself that he doesn't belong. And so, to me, that was just a way of explaining the attraction to Ada. I mean, they're both people who are apart from whatever the culture is that they're in. Although, of course, had it been a Maori actor, it would have been a different circumstance. It would have been someone, I guess you'd interpret it as somebody drawn to someone so completely other. You know, a white woman who doesn't speak, who's separate.
The character is written to be Maori. I think he's written to be half Maori. Okay. And so he did grow up in that area, but he was educated.
Oh, that's
elsewhere,
right. Go on and come back.
And then come back.
That's what
I'm saying. I mean, I think that there is a kind of a retroactive argument for that casting. I'm 100% sure it's just like economics. Yeah. They needed to get this movie made. They knew who they wanted and who they could get it made with to get it made at a certain budget, and that's what they had to do. I mean, Cliff Curtis at that time couldn't have helped them get that movie made at that budget.
Yeah, good point.
He's a great actor, but he probably still couldn't get any film finance at that budget. Yeah. Even though he's had a ton of recognition.
Right. And then I think the following year was both Once Were Warriors and Rapa Nui, which, remember Rapa Nui? It was supposed to be this huge deal, and it was just a massive bomb. Yeah. Really fascinating, weird attempt to tell a Pacific Islander story, the origins of Easter Island and all that, by Kevin Reynolds, director of Waterworld.
Poor guy.
Right? I think that was his big passion project after Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Jason Scott Lee and Sandrine Holt is in it. Like, it's a weirdly overqualified movie for what it ended up being. And there's an amazing action sequence at the very end that justifies the existence of the thing. But it's definitely a white guy telling an exotic story, and it does not play. And Curtis is in that too. I think all three actors from Rena Owen is in it, and I think Morrison is in it too.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was shot right around the same time and did not work. Would not have helped anybody. But Campion is going in a different angle and honoring literally everybody's story, and you get a movie out of it that is, it's 25 years later in the rearview mirror, it looks a little questionable, some of the choices and casting and some of the compromises they made to get it made. But I think we would probably see the same compromises be made now and just more loudly defended. And at the time, it wasn't a thing. Nobody really had any questions about
absolutely. it. Absolutely. And there's so much about it that's so great. And I think she has a connection to that landscape as well, which feels which feels very connected to that Indigenous community. Like the film feels so grounded in the landscape of that place, and I feel like there's a kind of a spiritual connection between that story and that landscape, and the way that she tells it. There's in a way that is beyond just, you know, beautiful pictures of this place. Like there's a sequence, I forget where it takes place in the film exactly, but she's Ada goes outside, and there's this, you know, breeze blows by, and she looks at the trees, and you sort of cut to the treetops, and the camera just kind of pushes in, and you see this breeze traveling across, and it's and she also exhales, and it's like this kind of breath that travels through the trees and goes to Baines, and there's this beautiful spiritual connection between her and the landscape and Baines, and it all feels really connected in a way that is so unusual for any film. And you know, I feel like that connection to the Indigenous characters in that story breathes something into that, and I don't know if that's just like a weird tenuous connection to make, but yeah, and it's coming from the voice of someone who loves the movie a lot.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think it all speaks to a certain respect for clarity and content and texture. And she's not just using them as background actors. She's involving them, their culture, their storyline, and she's making a movie about people who lose themselves in a new world.
Mm-hmm.
So that world should be as attractive and appealing and alive as you can make it.
And it's not about, you know, telling the story in an interesting setting as much as it is about really digging into that landscape and digging into that sense of place and using it in the story. So the story, you know, just feels like it's blossoming out of that landscape and feels really grounded in that place.
Yeah, and the sound design is another part of it too. I mean, there's just something going on all the time, both the sounds of the natural world and the music of the piano. There's always activity. It's a film that's constantly engaging with itself and with you. I mean, I remember seeing it in a tiny screening room, and they just installed stereo.
Oh, yeah.
Or Dolby. I mean, it was probably Dolby. It was proper Dolby, I assume. It was, 93?
Yeah.
And it was busy. It was the room was busy in a way. I mean, I remember Sweetie opens with some insect noises and some sounds of nature in this suburb where the film is set. But this one was like as immersive as you could be for a mid-budget movie in 1993. It was really active. And then the music, of course, is such a huge part of that too. The score and the film that's the music that's played diegetically in the film.
Yeah,
It's there was this vogue for a little while for classical movies. I want to say like Immortal Beloved was right around that corner. Bernard Rose's Beethoven movie.
Oh yeah.
And you just had all of these films where, I guess 10 years after Amadeus, people were trying to figure out new ways to use music in cinema.
Sure.
And this one, you know, because Ada is silent, because Holly Hunter is doing so much with her body and with her face, the music then becomes like just even angry. You can hear when she's playing angry. You can tell. She's like it's such a great performance, and I'm having just watched The Big Sick again the other night, and realizing it's the same person. It's just so jarring.
It is, yeah,
because she has had this incredible career.
She really has.
And I still, you know, Raising Arizona is one of my favorite comic performances. In the following week, she was in Broadcast News, or it felt like it anyway. They were both released.
I love Broadcast News.
Yeah,
she's so great in that.
And that was 5 years away from this. It's boggling to me that she's had that much range over her career, and that she can still be that interesting. But then you look at the piano, and it's like, yeah, that is her best performance. Like it's an alien role. She just submerges herself into it, and then physically too.
What I think is interesting about her, and I actually haven't done any research on her, but I'd love to know how she got started as an actor, because she is so unlikely.
Yeah.
She's been in a ton of stuff, but she never plays characters that are easily imagined, or the way that she plays them are not is not easily imagined. Like, she is tiny.
Yeah.
She has a weird, kind of ugly voice.
Yeah, a little bit.
She's a bit odd looking and doesn't... She just doesn't play the kind of... the ingenue, the bombshell.
Yeah. No,
she
she
just
never
doesn't
did.
have
You're right.
any of those kind of classical hits that when an actor walks into a casting room, a director or casting agent can say, "Oh yeah, you're that kind of woman." Mm-hmm. She's somebody who you can always be like, "Wow, you're really interesting. I can't imagine what you would be in." But then, once given an opportunity, and once people see her on screen, they can say, "Oh, wow, you can do so much. You're so interesting." But I wonder if she's one of those people who had a hard time getting cast for a while because she's got some things.
Yeah, she didn't burst out in her 20s, right? Like, by the time, I'm trying to think, like, her first big swoony romantic role was probably Always, the Spielberg movie.
Oh, yeah.
But she's playing someone who is already, like, she's lived. Like, she's had a life, she's had a relationship with Dreyfus, and that's over when the movie begins, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's sort of...
Yeah.
He's dead in the first 10 minutes, right? I mean, that's how that goes. And so she's playing someone in mourning and reawakening, and maybe that's the way you get into somebody who's in their 30s and looking for something like this. But it is she's had such an odd career because she's clearly young in Raising Arizona, or she's playing younger than she is. Edwina is not a fully formed adult human, but she is a fully formed character. And I guess maybe that's it. If you start with the Coen brothers, there's nowhere to go but up, and people immediately know that you're daring and different, and like the Coens were the Coens by then, right? It was 2 movies in.
Yeah.
They'd already established themselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely directors people were looking at and watching performances and loving. Like, people are obsessed with those movies. And so they, those actors immediately had followings. And
Yeah. But she's had a really strange nonconformist career, now that you mention it. And for some reason, my brain keeps putting her in the right stuff. She's not in it. But I can imagine her very easily as one of the astronauts' wives. Like, it just felt like those sketched characters who are also really, really lived in.
Yeah.
She would have fit in there. Like, that's the kind of ensemble picture. I don't know why my brain is doing that.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing she would be able to stand out in.
Yeah, you want to turn around and realize, I've been watching her all along. I just never really understood who she is. Like, no, she popped up, fully formed. And and in this, she's doing something that no one had seen her do before, even then. Like, after amazing everybody and astonishing everybody with her range, this comes out. And even the accent works in the voiceover, because she's playing someone who isn't her in any way. I think she's supposed to be Scottish or Irish. She has a lilt in the voiceover.
Yeah, I think she's
Scottish.
Voice. Yeah. Well, and the voice that she puts on, because there's so little of that voiceover, she could kind of sell it by changing her voice, because it's so much like higher and softer than her voice normally is. She doesn't. I think it was. I mean, The Piano was the first movie that I ever saw her in, and I was very alarmed when I saw her in. I forget the next thing that she was in that I saw, because it's just like, what is this weird, low, strange drawl that she has? It's like completely unlike how she is in that movie.
That would be such a weird place to see her first, too, because you're seeing... Yeah, it's not only is it something she'd never done before, it's not something she ever did again. Like, that kind of role didn't... She didn't go back to that kind of thing either. She did...
I think I'm sure she could have, like, gotten drawn into the Merchant Ivory wind tunnel, like Helena Bonham Carter did for a little while, and done those kinds of period...
Yeah. Be forced to fight her way out of them again. Yeah. Out of the corset.
Yeah.
But it's...
Kate Winslet, she also got drawn into that.
That's right. She was the go-to for like 5 years.
Yeah.
Who is it now? Oh, Claire Foy, I assume. The Queen and Breathe and things like that.
Right.
The proper roles. Emily Blunt almost got caught, but she pivoted.
Yes.
Yeah. She's too weird. That's what I really love about Emily Blunt. She's too weird to be constrained by these roles. She just wants to do strange comedies and go off and be goofy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a weird place. Like it's a pocket that's, again, it's easy to trap somebody in it. And I don't think Holly Hunter would ever be trapped, right? Like she immediately went off and did that. I want to say it was the same year, it might have been before, the Positively True Adventures of the Positively True Life Adventures of the Incredible Texas Cheerleader Murdering Mom. It's an HBO movie that is absolutely amazing, and she is phenomenal in it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
It's like a prequel to where we are now with self-aware television.
Yeah.
But that, I think, I'm almost positive she made it within hours of my seeing it. Because she is just this amazing force of nature in terms of performance. Even in The Big Sick, like her one shouting scene, everything quiets. Like the sound design drops out because it's afraid of her. Everything pulls her in. And that have you seen the film?
I have.
Yeah, the scene in the club where she just loses it for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's what rage is. I totally get that. And I'm just, again, I'm just stunned that she could do something like the piano where she can't speak, where she can't use that piece of her artillery and still be as compelling and striking. I mean, she dominates the frame, and she's a foot shorter than everybody else in it. Like Paquin's taller than her at a couple of shots. It's and we shouldn't really write off Anna Paquin either, because as bizarre as it is, you know, the youngest Oscar winner and all that, she's phenomenal. It's a great performance.
Oh my gosh, I wanted to be her. I was so jealous of her. And then when she went up during the Academy Awards and she was wearing that weird bejeweled beret.
Right, the purple thing.
Yeah, I felt like I was winning the Academy Award. I was so excited and weirdly proud of her.
Oh wow! I was just worried she'd pass out, the hyperventilating. Right? If you watched that live, you knew fear, you knew terror for this little girl who was just about to explode.
Yeah, she really was.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if that's part of what makes the film, or what helps the film to be really special, is that everything is centering around this performance that is mute, and from the first day of the script, they knew that was the conceit.
Yeah.
And so everything from when you're pulling in the DP, when you're talking with the other actors, when you're talking with the sound designer and deciding on the music, like you would be so aware every step of the way that stuff is going to matter 100 times more because the central performance is silent, and being so worried in the pre-production that everything needs to be so expressive and beautiful and poetic and meaningful, because you just can't lean on that crutch of dialogue in quite the same way.
And they don't cover for the character in the way that certain other films, like I'm thinking like Children of a Lesser God, where William Hurt is essentially repeating back all the dialogue that Marlee Matlin is signing. People are forced to interpret her in this film, but they don't interpret for her. There's no one talking for her. I mean, there's sort of her daughter presumes to speak for her briefly, but it goes away very quickly once they start fighting.
Well, yeah, I mean, her daughter does speak for her, and she doesn't care when her daughter gets it wrong.
Yeah,
and she has no desire to communicate. You know, which is also rare, I think, for a character that's mute. Usually, I feel like those kinds of representations are characters who are desperate to kind of be heard and communicate, and she does not give a shit.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to be here. She doesn't like anyone. She's not going to apologize for it. And it makes her very lovable in the strangest way.
Yeah. Well, you respect her anger. I think very quickly we understand where it's coming from, and we get it. Like, we get her. It's almost, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, just in the same way that now people could maybe engage with it on the casting question, it's also a refutation of an ableist narrative, which is only something we've started talking about really in the last 5 years as a concept. But it really is a film where the character who is, in theory, disabled is actually more functional and more complete than anybody else in the picture. Holly Hunter doesn't have that part of her arsenal of her voice, but with Ada, the silence is part of Ada's arsenal. She uses it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what makes her the hero, really, instead of a victim, which, you know, in a Gothic romance, you could interpret this character as she's there to suffer because men don't understand her. And that happens, but at no point does it feel like she's losing, right? Like, she's still...
Yeah.
she triumphs. Like, she's a triumphant character.
Definitely.
And maybe
I think
that's...
for people who, like I was when I was a kid, feeling very helpless and voiceless, to see somebody who was so completely voiceless and also absolutely not helpless.
Yeah.
Seeing her exercise her power was a really interesting and redeeming thing to experience on screen. But what was I going to say? Let's go.
It's okay. It'll come back in 2 minutes. That's how this works. I was going to ask, like, did the other people you showed it to feel that way? Did anybody respond to it the same way, or was it just a situational thing?
No, absolutely not. I've never shown it to anyone who liked it as much as I did.
Okay. And when was the last time? I mean, how do you still revisit it, or?
Yeah, the last person I showed it to was actually Sarah Klasky, who's my collaborator on Great Great Great.
Yeah.
And I was astounded that she'd never seen it, and it was maybe a couple of years ago that I sat her down and said, this is such a great movie, it's going to change your life. And I think she was a bit bored by it. It didn't have the same resonance. I mean, I think that all kinds of pieces of art are like that, especially things that you're exposed to when you're young. Like you never love a book the way you love a book that you feel like you discover when you're, I don't know, for me it was like 14, like 13, 14. And that book for me was the Grapes of Wrath, and I hate when people say mean things about the Grapes of Wrath. But
what is there mean to say?
Oh,
who's shit talking the Grapes of Wrath?
So many people.
We will have
words.
Why? What's wrong with you?
I'm not even going to get started on it. But I think that I have unfair expectations of people's love for that movie, because my love is based in that, like, very early
that formative discovery,
just feverish, passionate love for that movie, because it just felt like it opened up my eyes in a way that hadn't been done before.
Yeah.
For some reason, Ninja Turtles just didn't do it. It took Jane Campion and the piano.
Ninja Turtles doesn't open anybody's eyes. Unless they're on something already. And that's a nightmare experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The concept of, like, owning a movie like that, discovering something and keeping it close to you, and then sharing it with other people. That's what we do with art, right? That's how that's supposed to work. And it's funny too that Campion has had such a, I was going to say a spotty career, but I don't know that that's true. Like, if you look back on her work since the piano, you get The Portrait of a Lady, which was, it's a Jane Campion film through and through, but it was also kind of a misunderstood attempt at investigating Henry James. It was just before people started doing active subversion of classics in their adaptations. Patricia Rozema's Mansfield Park came out right afterwards, I think, and it just missed its window, and people didn't quite get what she was doing with it. And then she did that Meg Ryan erotic thriller with Mark Ruffalo that no one talks about, but is
Hideous Kinky.
Hideous Kinky, that's right. I forget about Hideous Kinky. And Bright Star, which nobody gave any love to, which is just, I had to buy the Blu-ray from France. There is no decent Blu-ray edition of it in North America or England.
Really? That's so interesting, because I remember at TIFF people loved it.
And Cannes too. It came out like a
rave.
Yeah, it just didn't take. I wonder if it's because maybe the distributors went under or something, but it's a marvelous film. And then now that she's doing Top of the Lake, she's sort of reclaimed her position as, New Zealand's premier storyteller, really, because Peter Jackson's off doing things that aren't, speaking to people on an emotional or dramatic level. Sorry, he's just not. But someone's going to write in about The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. But
well, now Taika Waititi's been taken away by Thor.
That's right. Oh, but I love the idea that he gets to do whatever he wants with it.
No, for sure. I'm very excited for Thor. But I think he's done making small personal movies for a little while. Yeah. He's going to make a shit ton of money for a little while.
And
take off laughing.
Bless him. Exactly. I can think of no one else who deserves a bigger blank check, really. He's such a weird artist. I love him.
Yeah.
But Campion has just settled into this thing now where she is doing stark, emotional, bleak work in New Zealand. Like, she's back where she was after this time in the weeds. And it's such a strange career because it's so consistent, right?
There's something in all of those movies that's really interesting. Like, when even the film that we talked about, In the Cut with Meg Ryan, like, there's still an intellect at work. She's still working through something, and it might not be like a totally resolved, perfect work, but that's not what we need artists for. We need artists to think about things and wrestle through things, and sometimes you need to wrestle with something, get it out of the way in order to make the next thing. And I think that she's an amazing filmmaker and has a really special voice, and you might not like all her movies, but there's always something, there's always questions that she's asking, there's always something that she's wrestling with.
Yeah, I'm waiting for In the Cut to be rediscovered, because in light of Top of the Lake, it kind of lines up. It's a thriller about violence against women and attraction to something that probably isn't good for you in a way that is expressed as an erotic thriller that isn't an erotic thriller. I mean, it's what you get if an artist is given this material, that she finds the pulp and discards it because that's not where her interests lie. But as a result, it also takes all the tension out of the thing that people think they're buying a ticket to see.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
there's a Blu-ray here somewhere. It was released on a double bill with some other Sony Pictures, like some other Columbia Pictures dud. The Perceived Failure double pack that they released. Those cheap ones that came out a little while ago?
Yeah.
We couldn't market these on our own. Here's Hollywood Homicide and Hudson Hawk.
Yeah.
They both start with H's. But the $3.99 thing, I found it at a Canadian Tire of all places.
Oh, okay. I was going to say Walmart.
Yeah, it's probably there too. But it is such a weird thing for her to be doing, and the piano, not coincidentally, is a film about sex and violence and how the two are, triggers for one another, and what desire leads to. I mean, she hasn't changed her tune, and in 25 years, she's still interested in the same stuff, or she's found a way to make that stuff interesting.
Yeah,
which I suppose is more important. Sorry, that wasn't even really a question. That was just me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been interesting. I think the way that she deals with those things has always been interesting, but maybe not as consistent or as consistently entertaining.
Yeah, or commercially successful. Maybe that's just just that simple. Like, Bright Star has almost no sex in it, but it's about desire, and it's swooningly romantic and beautifully realized. I mean, just the purple imagery, the just literally reflecting Keats's prose in a frame. It's just such a beautiful film, and there are people who don't know it exists, and it makes me sad. That's one I forced on people for a while. Just like, how have you missed this?
I think that you're right that there was an issue with the distributor.
Yeah, it was TVA in Canada. I don't know who put it out in the States, but they just, for whatever reason, no high def version, and it is gorgeous. Just such a sumptuous experience. So, if nothing else, if anyone is listening, please start lobbying Criterion to release Bright Star. That would be very nice. Thank you.
That would be really great.
Yeah, and they've done Campion before. They know the territory.
Yeah.
It's not like they couldn't have a relationship with it. And it's the other thing I was going to say, just noticing that both you and Sarah picked films by really distinct female filmmakers with a specific vision. You've got this, and she chose Lynn Ramsey's Morven Caller.
Yeah.
Which, did she show that one to you by any chance? I'm just wondering, you mentioned you showed this to her.
Yeah, I think that I did watch that with Sarah the first time.
And this is what people do. They share their passions. It's great.
Yeah.
And so, to just the closing question on the podcast is always the same, which is, what of, if anything, of the piano have you borrowed or stolen or quoted or absorbed into your own creative DNA?
Oh man, I think that it's impossible for me to know. I think that it's a movie that I'm so close to that. I mean, I've never consciously stolen anything from that film, but I think that it is very well represented in my creative DNA. And if someone were to comb through the things I've done, and it would be pretty obvious that it was there.
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of great, and it's almost a mirror image of it, because your film is about someone who can't articulate what she wants, and the piano is about a woman who, like, maybe physically can't explain it, but is through her lack of speech, but is very clear about her desires throughout. Mm-hmm. And so you've made the anti-piano in a completely different context.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's why Ada is a hero, because she does so clearly know what she wants, and she just fights her way through to get it. And maybe that's why she's still a hero for me, and why I made Great the way that I did, or the way that we did, because I feel like in most situations in my life, I don't have that clarity. I wish I had that clarity and that ferocity to just dig through and, you know, get what I want and make it happen at all costs. But I remembered the thing that I was going to say before, which was a huge amount of Ada's strength comes from her powers as a woman, because there are certain things that they could do to women, and certain things that they weren't able to do to women at that time, and also because of her class at that time. You know, she's really sheltered by her class. Mm-hmm. Because if Sam Neill's character were written to be a more brusque guy, you know, more than he is, right, he would have just, you know, beaten her senseless, killed her, or put her on a boat and sent her back home, and then there wouldn't have been a story. But so they needed to create a situation where she would be protected by her class enough that she could refuse to speak to people. She could really kind of tear through society and do what she pleases, and not pay the price for that until the very end, until she takes it too far.
And his illusion of nobility is keeping him from reacting more brutally, mm-hmm, because even though he's clearly not a good person, and he's not ultimately unwilling to be violent, mm-hmm, and horrifically so, he's giving himself credit for restraining himself the whole time. His privilege keeps him from harming her. And
right, absolutely. I'm sure he's telling himself that he's being a very noble, gentle person.
Yes, exactly.
Until he cuts her finger off.
Yeah, well. Sooner or later the monster comes out. It's just that gives the film its underpinning of tension too, because we know this isn't going to end well. You can just given the way that the film opens, and given the way that the affair is presented, it's something that's tense and hidden, mm-hmm, and it's only a matter of time throughout that something very bad is coming.
Yeah, I mean, you have a very strong woman between two extremely weak men. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work out well.
Yeah, and a child who thinks she's being strong, but is actually just... She's a kid. She doesn't know any better. She literally thinks she's helping, and she's angry. And that's how it comes out.
Or just kind of like instigating things because it's interesting, because she's bored. Mm. You know, kids get bored and are spiteful, and, you know, it doesn't mean that they suddenly hate their parents or anything. It's just...
Yeah. It's just coming out.
They're testing. They're seeing what happens in the world. Like, if I do this, what will the impact of that be?
Yeah.
And she just takes it a little farther than most.
I guess I'm glad you didn't identify with her when you were watching it as an 11-year-old, because some terrible things might have come from that.
Right. Yeah, no.
My thanks to Adam Garnet Jones, whose excellent Great is now available to rent or buy on iTunes. You should do that. It's a very good movie, and Sarah Kolaski is terrific in it. And by all means, go into our archives to pull up her episode on Morven Caller when you have a chance. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can find Adam on Twitter at Adam Garnet Jones, all one word, and you can find The Piano on Blu-ray and DVD from Lionsgate in the USA and from Entertainment One in Canada. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it really does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.